For years, it was just a rumor. But now, the legendary tank killer has arrived in Ukraine. The Italian Centauro B-1 is already in the hands of Ukraine's 78th Separate Air Assault Regiment, and it's about to make ragu alla bolognese out of the Russian tank fleet. So let's see why this piece of armor is going to stick and change the war in Ukraine. To understand why the Centauro is perfect for Ukraine, we have to look at what it was built for. The story of the Centauro B-1 begins in Cold War-era Italy in the early 1980s, when the Italian army, a key member of NATO, found itself facing the threat of the Soviet Union and the possibility of a continental European war. They needed an armored vehicle that could bridge the gap between heavy main battle tanks and light reconnaissance vehicles. At the time, Italy's army relied mostly on tracked tanks, like the German Leopard 1 and the older American M47 and M60 Patton. These tanks were powerful and well-armored, but they were also heavy, slow to move, and expensive to maintain. After seeing how effective France's 8x8 AMX-10RC was in African conflicts during the 1970s, Italian defense planners started looking for a similar but more mobile option. A wheeled tank destroyer that could drive itself over long distances, be light enough for air transport, and still pack enough firepower to destroy the latest Soviet tanks. Today, that's exactly what Ukraine needs. A fast, mobile vehicle that can hit hard, especially as Russia rolls out those same old Soviet tanks. Italy began developing the Centauro project in 1984, assigning Iveco Fiat and Auto Melara to bring the concept to life. Iveco Fiat focused on the hull and drivetrain, while Auto Melara handled the gun and the turret systems. Design work began in 1986, and by the following year, prototype units were already rolling. It was a remarkably quick turnaround that showed how simple and reliable the new design really was. By 1991, the Centauro B-1 entered service with the Italian Army. Around 400 units were built before production ended in 2006, as attention shifted to the Centauro II, which began entering service in 2021. The Centauro was built for one thing: speed. Its 8x8 wheeled chassis gave it exceptional mobility, powered by an Iveco V6 turbo diesel engine delivering 520 horsepower. On roads, it was fast. It can reach 100 kilometers per hour and travel over 800 kilometers without refueling. Off-road, it performed far better than most vehicles without tracks, owing to its light weight of just 24 tons. The Centauro is nearly half the mass of an M60 Patton and far lighter than a Leopard 1. And that matters in Ukraine, where heavy armor often sinks into the mud before it ever reaches the front. That lightweight also gives it a strategic edge. A C5 Galaxy can hold 4 Centauros, where 2 Pattons or even a single M1A1 would fill the hold. It's also simple to drive, with a steering wheel, gas, and brake pedals, like a car. Most importantly, it's also very easy to maintain in the field. In short, it's not really a tank at all. It's a high-speed armored gun built for battlefields like Ukraine. And speaking of guns, now it's time to talk about the good stuff. The Centauro B-1 carries the Otto Merara 105mm rifled gun, strong enough to pierce through Soviet armor. It's fully stabilized, with a thermal sleeve to keep it cool under fire and a digital fire control system. Both the gunner and commander have stabilized sights, thermal imaging, and laser range finding, allowing the Centauro to hit targets precisely, even on the move. For its time, this was a cutting-edge technology. It lets the Centauro hit targets with precision, whether standing still or racing across the battlefield. And it's safe to assume that the models now headed to Ukraine come with modern upgrades that keep the same deadly accuracy in today's war. Unlike the French AMX-10 that inspired it, the Centauro fires standard NATO 105mm ammunition, including armor-piercing, high-explosive anti-tank, and high-explosive shells. This gives it versatility against both armored and soft targets. It carries up to 40 rounds, with 14 ready in the turret and 26 stored in the hull. For support, it's armed with a 7.62mm machine gun and another mounted for air defense. The crew is made up of 4: a driver, loader, gunner, and commander. What this design represents is a vehicle built around mobility, redeployment speed, and a mix of infantry support and anti-armor capability, rather than focusing on pure tank-on-tank slugfests. From the outset, the Centauro was designed to fight on a Cold War battlefield, just like the one Ukrainian troops find themselves on today. It's meant to accompany mounted infantry units and offer a serious threat to heavy Russian armor, while being able to move and redeploy quickly, keeping operations running longer and more efficiently than a full-blown tracked battle tank. Now, the Centauro's design was never about brute force. It was about mobility and flexibility. A vehicle built to move fast, redeploy quickly, and support infantry while still posing a serious threat to enemy armor. From the start, it was made for the Cold War battlefield. And surprisingly, that's the same kind of environment Ukrainian troops are fighting in today. Its role isn't to trade blows with tanks and head-on duels, but to outmaneuver them. It strikes hard, relocates fast, and keeps operations running longer and more efficiently than any heavy tracked tank could. This has all been proven on the battlefield. In its early years, the Centauro served with Italy's cavalry regiments, often deployed in peacekeeping and NATO operations. It first saw action in the Balkans as part of the NATO implementation force after the Daytona Peace Accords, then in Somalia. Ironically, one Centauro fought a 4-hour battle with insurgents at a closed pasta factory. Later, the Centauro was sent to Iraq during the 2003 Gulf War, and today a dozen still serve with the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. These deployments gave Italy invaluable experience with the Centauro. At first, many doubted the idea of using lighter wheeled armor in serious conflicts, but over time it became a core component of modern infantry doctrine. And now, decades later, that same concept is being put to the test once again, this time in Ukraine. On a battlefield defined by long distances, shifting front lines, and muddy roads, the Centauro can give Ukraine an edge. It's the kind of platform that can strike hard, redeploy fast, and stay in the fight longer. Precisely what Ukraine needs to attack Russia's slower, heavier armor. Now, Italy hasn't said too much about it. Italy's policy towards Ukraine has been to keep the details about military aid a secret. The first reports of the Centauro being used in Ukraine actually came from battlefield footage. This secrecy is typical of NATO countries providing aid, with the notable exception of the United States and Germany, which tend to announce their deliveries publicly. There's two main reasons why to keep these deliveries under wraps. They don't want to signal to the Russians that they're intervening, which would invite hybrid warfare tactics on Italy. Strategically, they also don't want the Russians to know what the Ukrainians are getting before it's actually on the battlefield. While the Italians and the Ukrainians haven't said just how many Centauros are being sent, we can make a good guess by looking at Italy's own numbers. In total, Italy has built around 400 Centauro B1s. Over the years, 141 were sold to Jordan, and another 12 are deployed in Lebanon with UN peacekeepers. That leaves roughly 250 vehicles still in Italy's hands. Since Italy is now switching to the newer Centauro 2, many of those older B1s are sitting in storage. Analysts believe around 50 to 60 are now surplus, and if Italy follows the usual NATO route of keeping about 20% in reserve, that would leave roughly 20 to 40 Centauros available for donation. That estimate lines up with reports from Army Recognition and several open-source intelligence accounts on X. What we do know is what we see with our eyes, though. The Centauro shown in a video from the 78th Regiment are up-armored with anti-cumulative cages and foldable grills, in line with what we've seen on most Ukrainian and Russian armor. The extra armor is meant to trigger incoming warheads before they hit, lowering the chance that Russian drones or anti-tank missiles can punch through the hole. Still, the Centauro isn't as tough as the main battle tank, like the F-72. In the footage, Ukrainian soldiers seemed aware of that. One of them joked that he'd preferred thicker armor, but added that the best tank is the one you have, and the worst one is the one you don't. But armor is only part of the story. On today's battlefield, having a tank destroyer like the Centauro might be far superior to having a traditional main battle tank. That's because the era when heavy tanks ruled the battlefield seems to be over. When the United States sent M1A1 Abrams tanks and M2 Bradley infantry vehicles to Ukraine in late 2023, there was a lot of excitement, especially about the Abrams. But by April of 2024, the Abrams had already been pulled from the front after suffering heavy losses to top-down drone strikes. The Bradley, on the other hand, became a troop favorite and is still fighting today because it's smaller, faster, and more agile. Thick, slanted armor doesn't help much against drones that strike from above. Russia has learned that lesson the hard way too, as shown by countless videos of tanks being destroyed from the sky. That's why the Centauro makes sense for this war. It can move quickly, driving at highway speeds into and out of combat. In today's battlefield, speed and flexibility often matter more than armor. And as Russia's tanks reserves dwindle and experienced crews become harder to replace, Ukraine's advantage will come from vehicles like this. They're fast, light, and deadly. In the hands of Ukraine's seasoned and resourceful soldiers, the Centauro could become one of the most effective tools on the battlefield. Especially against the backdrop of US aid still being on hold since January, Ukraine's European allies have to dig deep to find meaningful ways to help. Sending these Italian-built Centauros may not grab headlines, but for Ukraine's frontline troops, it could make all the difference. One thing is clear though, the Centauro won't save the day all on its own. Apart from mobility, Ukraine also needs reach. That's why the Centauro pairs so well with another piece of armor Ukraine is receiving. Greece, another southern European country, has just announced that it's sending the American-made M110A2 self-propelled howitzer. This Cold War workhorse is slow and heavy, but it packs some serious firepower and range. It's ideal to pound the Russian forces to the ground. Together with the Centauro, it's a complete package for the front. The Centauro does fast and surgical strikes, while the howitzer does deep, sustained strikes. Under a €199 million deal routed through Czechia, Greece is set to send Ukraine 60 M110A2 howitzers, plus 150,000 rounds of 203mm ammunition, and thousands of 70mm and 127mm Zuni rockets. The M110A2 is a lightly modernized version of the Cold War original. It's not about speed or fancy sensors. What matters is raw firepower. A single 203mm shell weighs roughly 90 to 95 kilograms and can carry either a massive high-explosive charge or about 180 submunitions. That simple math of weight, blast, and reach is what makes the M110A2 a game-changer on the battlefield. Czechia plays a key role in the M110A2 transfer, acting as the main hub for weapons moving into Ukraine. Early in the war, Prague positioned itself as a central intermediary for Western aid, setting up fast-track export laws and agreements that let foreign weapons pass through its territory with minimal red tape. Its long rail links to the Ukrainian border make Czechia ideally suited for this role as the EU's clearinghouse. In this deal, Greece sends its surplus artillery to Czechia, which then handles the rest. As a quick side note, the role that Czechia plays now might soon be in jeopardy. As of the October 4th election, a new leader came to power in Czechia, pledging to end military aid to Ukraine. If that happens, another bordering country may have to step in to keep the supply lines open. But back to the hardware. The M110 family is a Cold War classic. It is a design that dates back to the late 1950s and entered the U.S. Army service in 1963 as America's heavy self-propelled howitzer. It grew out of post-World War II efforts to create massive, long-range guns that could move with the front lines. The M110 used the same 8-inch gun found on the older M115 towed howitzer, but it mounted it on tracks, giving NATO the ability to deliver deeper counter-battery fire with real mobility. Over the decades, the design evolved. The M110A1 of the late 1970s added a longer barrel for greater range, while the M110A2, the version now headed to Ukraine, had stronger propellant charges and greater firepower. The howitzer's ammunition history is very remarkable. The M110 has fired everything from basic training shells to the W79, a tactical nuclear warhead with a yield of 1.1 kilotons of TNT. That's roughly the size of the 2020 explosion that leveled the port of Beirut. Ukraine probably won't be using those things, but it just goes to show that the howitzer shouldn't be underestimated. As the M110 enters its 6th decade of service, it has built up a solid record on the battlefield. It first saw action in Vietnam during the 1960s and 1970s, and returned in force during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, with both US and British artillery units. Throughout the Cold War and into the 1990s, the M110 was exported widely to allies like the United Kingdom, Spain, and the Netherlands, among many others. Middle Eastern operators and several NATO partners continue to use M110 variants to this day. In total, the system has been exported to around 20 countries, and it has appeared in at least 12 major conflicts from Vietnam to Ukraine. It's still fielded by 10 nations worldwide. So while most Western armies have moved on to guided missiles, rocket artillery, and precision strike systems, the M110 endures. In Ukraine, it is once again proving its worth. Designed to smash endless artillery barrages and armored advances, the M110 is back to break the very Russian doctrine it was built to counter. Now, to fully understand why Ukraine needs a Western 8-inch howitzer, we also have to look across the lines at what the Russians are using. Their counterpart is the 2S7 Pion, a massive 203mm self-propelled gun introduced in the 1970s. It remains the backbone of heavy artillery for both Russian and Ukrainian forces today, but Russia simply has more of them, along with a deeper stockpile of shells. Even though the Pion has more range, the M110A2 still packs enough of a punch to be a serious rival. It can handle the same tasks, such as area denial and counter-battery fire. These capabilities are exactly why Western planners kept the 203mm gun in service for so long during the Cold War, and why it still has a role to play in Ukraine today. Now, operationally, the M110A2 isn't a one-man show. The rounds are bulky, and the barrel must be lowered to load. That's why the gun's normal sustained rate is only 3 rounds every 2 minutes. Because of that work, the M110A2 travels with a large detachment, about 13 men in total. 5 ride on the gun vehicle itself: the commander, driver, gunner, and the close crew, while the rest ride in an accompanying M548 carrier that carries the ammunition, tools, and spare parts. But when it fires, all that extra effort is worth it. One of the 203mm M106 shells hits like a sledgehammer, with more than twice the explosive punch of the standard 155mm round. It can tear up hardened positions that smaller guns can't touch. The blast is lethal within 50 meters, with shrapnel spreading up to 380 meters. Ukraine is getting 50,000 of these high-explosive rounds. But it's not only that. It's also getting 40,000 M650 Hera rocket-assisted rounds, 30,000 M404 ICM cluster shells, and 30,000 M509A1 DPICM dual-purpose cluster rounds. These cluster munitions are rare in Ukraine's arsenal, but they're incredibly powerful for breaking up massed attacks. Now, those cluster rounds are controversial, and they're actually banned by many countries under the Convention on Cluster Munitions. But Ukraine and Greece aren't signatories, so they can be used. And in a war against Russia, the kind of firepower that cluster munitions have to offer really matters. Now, another advantage of the howitzer is that it is surprisingly easy to maintain. There are no complex digital fire control networks to worry about, which means the gun is immune to electronic warfare. It's all about steel, hydraulics, and diesel. Even its engine, the Detroit 8V71T, is just a turbocharged version of a motor once used in buses and motorhomes. Crews can still calculate their shots the old-fashioned way, using range tables, optical sights, and forward observers, including drones or spotters on the ground. In the field, repairs are pretty straightforward, the kind of work Ukrainian crews already know from years of operating both Western and Soviet-built vehicles. It's part of the M110's charm. It's rugged, simple, and for repair it needs nothing more than a set of heavy tools and some diesel know-how. And somewhere in Ukraine right now, there are probably mechanics thankful that a few countries decided to keep these guns in storage for all these years. All in all, the M110A2 and the Centauro give Ukraine what today's battlefield actually rewards. The Centauro brings fast, NATO-standard firepower for ambushes and infantry support. The M110A2 delivers deep, punishing strikes against Russian guns and strongpoints. In a war where drones hunt from above, the ability to hit far away and move fast is crucial. No single system will decide this war, but together, these two form an ideal armored duo, making Ukraine harder to break and Russia's advances costlier by the day. If you're tired of getting your news from media outlets owned by billionaires, lobbyists, and government mouthpieces, then you're gonna love Global Recaps. It's our free newsletter where we break down what's really happening in the world, from the Russia-Ukraine war to China's global moves, without sponsors, ads, or censorship. No corporate filters, no both sides spin. Just straight, unfiltered geopolitics. The kind of analysis most mainstream outlets are a little too afraid to touch. We write it ourselves, independently, and we answer to you, not some boardroom in New York or Beijing. If you want a place where the truth still matters, where headlines aren't for sale, and where global stories are told as they are, then join Global Recaps right now. Just click the link in the description or go to globalrecaps.com and sign up. It's free, it takes 10 seconds, and it's the one email you'll actually want to open every week.